This is Ruth Kelso. Ruth was 23, and she was killed by Pfizer and died suddenly. This is Tony Shingler. Tony was in ICU for 14 months. This is Ali Lilly. Now, Ali is, she's one of the strongest women that I know because she was vaccine injured by Moderna. And her brother, Peter Reeves, was killed by AstraZeneca. First of all, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. Clearly, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a statistician, and I'm not a scientist. I'm an activist. And this was me in May of 2020, and it was the first time I'd ever actually been on any rally or protest. And the thing that I was standing up against was obviously what I thought at the time, dictatorship, tyranny, and totalitarianism with the lockdowns and the mandates. So this was me in May of 2020, and this was me later that day. So at my very first rally, where I stood with my placard and my sign, I was later arrested by some horrific cops. These are very unflattering pictures. I know I look a bit different now. But this was my first arrest ever for gathering in a group of more than 2. So those were the rules at the time. And I went on and had a few more experiences with the police. And this top one here in the corner, I was arrested for under the Terrorism Act for organizing a peaceful protest because we were talking about the potential dangers of the new experimental mRNA vaccines, non-vaccines. So yes, I've had a bit of interaction with the police, and this is obviously Downing Street in Parliament. And I've got to point out, we've got Wilsey here, who's our live streamer. He's in the room with us today, and he's streaming this event all over to the UK. And also, I will say that Dr. Mike Yeadon, the ex-VP of Pfizer, is currently watching live. So we've got a bit of a VIP. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Mike, for watching. And these are pictures from several of the rallies that I have organized. We've had hundreds of thousands of people marching on the streets of London, even before the rollout of these experimental jabs, to stop them from being rolled out and to warn about the potential dangers. So being arrested didn't stop me from standing up, and I'm sure it's not stopped any of you. And in September of 2021, I think this is one of my favorite arrests, actually. I decided to make paint bombs, which I threw at number 10 Downing Street, which is where our Prime Minister lives. And obviously you can see he's covered in paint, this riot police officer here. I'm caught red-handed with red paint on my hands. The reason I did this was to show that the government has blood on their hands for rolling out this jab. And by this point, it was almost a year that they'd been injecting people, and they'd started injecting children. So we were standing always for the children and for the future of the children. So I was later arrested by 30 police officers and held in custody for 3 days. But even when I was arrested and I was going to court regularly, being convicted, and when I was released from court in a very attractive prison jumpsuit, we still campaigned outside the courtroom. And here, this yellow board you see, this is in 2021, and these were the adverse events and deaths from the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccine that we were already seeing. So even when I was due in court, I was still campaigning against this vaccine. And then in January of 2022, there appeared on this is, sorry, very blurry here, an independent newspaper article, and the headline was "Anti-Vaxxer Willing to Die for Her Cause." And I can say that headline was true then, and it's still true now. I will never stop fighting, again, like I'm sure many of you will. And the purpose of this rally was against the NHS mandates. The NHS is our National Health Service. So we had 80,000 unvaccinated NHS workers, clinical staff, so that's paramedics, nurses, and doctors who refused to take this vaccine, 88,000 of them, marched with us, and they threw their uniforms back over the gates of number 10 Downing Street to say that they wouldn't take that vaccine. And it worked, and 4 days later, that vaccine mandate for the NHS was dropped. So this protest sent a message with hundreds of thousands of people standing together against vaccine mandates. And obviously I carried on campaigning, and it's been almost 5 years and I still haven't stopped, and I'm stood here with you today. And I have done professional stuff as well. So as well as the protesting, you might recognize this man right here. This is Gerald Hauser, who I had the privilege of speaking alongside in the European Parliament on the 4th of July last year. And you might recognize a few other faces. You have Kula Kusic, Christian Terres, Christine Anderson. On the bottom here as well, you'll see Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. Robert Malone, and also Dr. David E. Martin. And you might not know these gentlemen, but they have produced some of the best films that you've seen that have been seen globally. One film we made was called Ask the Experts. It was seen 80 million times in 1 week, and the president of Brazil at the time, Bolsonaro, shared it. So this went far and wide, and they have been working relentlessly ever since. That's Oracle Films, if anyone wants to see their work. And I must say, my personal hero is Dr. Mike Eden. He is the ex-VP of Pfizer Global, and he is the most senior person and pharmaceutical expert speaking out on these vaccines or non-vaccines in the world. There's no one more qualified than this man to speak on the toxicology and the toxicity of these jabs, certainly the Pfizer one, so we'll be hearing from him later. I don't want to do too much data. You can't really see that much, but I'm not an analyst, and I despise data, and they make it very difficult for us to find. But this is just an example of one of the reasons why I knew in 2020 why the pandemic was nonsense. We were being lied to. This is a freedom of information request. So this has come from a hospital where, and I won't harp on about it, no patients died only of COVID, and the coroners did no autopsies whatsoever. Autopsies were pretty much banned globally. And surely in the height of a pandemic, you would safely conduct autopsies to see how badly the body would be affected by COVID-19. So there was one massive lie. So no patients died in a year in a hospital in one county of COVID, not one. And it's the same for this request, freedom of information request as well. In another county at a different hospital, one person died of COVID, but they were over the age of 80. And again, no post-mortems. I think the one thing that infuriates me the most is this little one and all we care. Now, this is our National Health Service, and the hospital I showed you the freedom of information request from before, they don't care because they murdered our elderly in the care homes, and the only spike during 2020, during the pandemic, was when they euthanized 38,000 elderly people in care homes with midazolam and remdesivir with morphine. So they do not care. So fast forward 2 years and we get to the data of excess deaths. Now I'm going to zoom over this one, but we get our statistics partly from the Office for National Statistics, and we get a weekly breakdown of all of the excess deaths. So this is 33 weeks where we had nearly 40,000 excess deaths in the UK, and a year later there was at least 1,500 excess deaths every single week, which would be, over 4 years now, 312,000 excess deaths. Now, we don't get the truth, so I don't trust this data. I think it's actually much, much worse. So I don't rely on the government for much data, but we have to use what we can possibly find. So you'll see over 40,000 excess deaths, and that's gone up by 20.9%. And this is from February of 2023, because this was the last time the UK government decided to release the actual data of the adverse events of each vaccine, non-vaccine. Sorry, I keep calling it a vaccine. I'm aware it's not. It's gene therapy. It's not a vaccine. So we would break down by each type of vaccine exactly how many reports there were made on the MHRA, which was our yellow card scheme. It's the way that you report all adverse events for any kind of drug. It's the regulatory body in our country. So they were releasing for up to 2 years, once a month, the updated statistics. This is Feb 2023. So you can probably bet this is more than 2 million now for total reports. And this isn't just a sore arm. These are adverse event reports that are more serious than just getting a bit sore, a bit sort of sick for 15 minutes. A note on the system that, like every system, vaccine reporting system across the world, they're entirely passive. They are down to the patient to report. But as I'm sure everybody knows, the reason we are here, with regards to these non-vaccines, they don't want you reporting them to your government body, to your regulatory body at all. So they actually actively discourage it by gaslighting you and telling you, oh, you probably had cancer before, or we just didn't find it, or you probably had a bad heart even though you were perfectly fit and healthy. So they gaslight. And obviously, this figure, the 1.6 million total adverse drug reactions reported to the MHRA, is only 2 to 10% of the real figure. So I'm going to be kind and say, and use an example of 10% later. So we know that this doesn't reflect the reality. And on that, I'm sure some of you will know Ed Dowd, who's author of Cause Unknown, which is forwarded by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's now in a particular job. This guy was a data analyst, like he knows numbers, and he stated, and I'll read it for the sake of subtitles, we estimate around 5 billion individuals on the planet took a COVID vaccine of any kind. If you apply globally, the range of death rate in the US, you get a range of 7.3 million to 15 million dead, a range of 29 million to 60 million disabled, with 500 million to 900 million injured. If you add all those top ranges together, you get 975 million people injured, disabled, or dead from these vaccines, and he's being generous. Rancourt's figures are a lot higher than his, but that's based on the US data. And this is all for an alleged pandemic that used a flawed test to diagnose it with no postmortems, which, according to the World Health Organization, killed 7 million people who died with COVID, not of COVID. So I talked about that 10% earlier on. So if this is 10% of the true figure, bearing in mind this is 2 years ago, so it's going to be higher, potentially over 16 million people in the UK alone have been harmed, injured, disabled, or killed by these vaccines. And that's 23% of our 69 million population. So if 7 million makes for a pandemic, what would you call this in one country? Da, da, da. Now, what I want to say about this is there a conflict of interest in the reporting? Of course there is, because every single country is entirely corrupted by the funding for their regulatory bodies that comes from Big Pharma. So 86% of the MHRA, who are the regulatory body for medical products, including the COVID vaccine, are 86% funded by Big Pharma. The European Medicines Agency, which is relevant to you, is 89% funded by Big Pharma. The FDA is 65%. Australia, TGA, is 96% funded by Big Pharma. Canada, surprisingly, 50%, but they've got Trudeau. And Japan at 85%. So there is absolutely a conflict of interest when it comes to actually reporting on the adverse events and why the vaccine injured and bereaved are proactively discouraged from even reporting. They don't want to know the truth. They don't want the true figures, and they don't want to give them to us. In the UK, we have a vaccine damage payment scheme. It is not compensation, but they pay up to £120,000 if you potentially lose a limb or lose a life. So People are waiting for up to over 2 years to get a response for their claim. They've had 15,000 claims made so far, and this is as of about 2 weeks ago. Only 7,000, just over 7,000 have been notified, and 188 claims were successful, but over 180 in the UK of these claims were AstraZeneca. Now, the reason that we're seeing the AstraZeneca claims come in is because AstraZeneca, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, has been withdrawn from the market. Okay, they can finally admit that it did cause vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia. Okay, the blood clotting, the strokes, the cardiac arrest. They've withdrawn AstraZeneca from the market, so suddenly we're seeing an influx of reports with people connecting the dots because they've been told by their doctors, you've probably got an underlying health condition, you've probably got a bad heart. When they go and report that these problems that they're having to their doctors, they're being told that they're not injured, that it's underlying conditions. So one of the main reasons that people aren't being paid out by the government, actually the taxpayer is paying for these payouts, is because we can't prove causation, or a vaccine injured or bereaved is struggling to prove causation. So they can't prove that the vaccine caused their harm because an independent assessor recommended on the balance of probabilities that the vaccine did not cause the disability in question. I wonder where the independent assessor comes from. And we have seen headline after headline after headline of cancer, 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 shock cancer, aggressive cancer, late-stage cancer diagnosis. Cancer cases in England hit a record high with almost 1,000 people being diagnosed with cancer every day. This is mRNA. This is what mRNA is doing to people. AstraZeneca is different to the Pfizer and the Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson, the other vaccines, non-vaccines. But we are seeing these headlines. None of these people are being acknowledged as being vaccine injured. They're just getting cancer and dying very, very quickly. And if you want to know more about cancer, because I'm not an oncologist and I'm not a scientist, but Professor Angus Dalgleish, you can find his work at Conservative Woman. If you want to take a picture of the screen, he is the man that has linked mRNA jabs. You can speak to me after, I'll have the information if anyone wants it. He's written a paper on the link between the mRNA COVID vaccines and cancer. Unequivocal proof, because it contains an ingredient that's known to cause tumors within humans and animals. So he explains that in detail, but I'm not going to try and do any more because I'm not a scientist. And obviously we see headlines, died suddenly, died unexpectedly, but died suddenly obviously is one that I'm sure we have all seen in our own countries. Again, not being acknowledged as vaccine injury, just people dropping dead on the sports field, heart attacks, cardiac arrest, serious cardiac events, and surprising with so many young people being affected. In the United Kingdom, they are vaccinating 5-year-old children and pregnant women with these vaccines, and the propaganda campaigns are ongoing. In the doctor's surgery, you will see a sign that says, bring yourself, your child, and your unborn baby into the surgery and get your flu vaccine and your COVID jab together, which have never been tested. No two vaccines have ever been tested together. That's a fact. And they're giving this to pregnant women and children of 5 years old. Sorry, it makes me very angry. And we're not really seeing anything. So the government doesn't simply refuse to acknowledge this. They're not kind of confused and they don't know what's going on and, ever so slightly incompetent during the lockdown. Every single thing was planned. None of this was an accident. It wasn't, a pandemic's happening, we better try and lock down and see what we can do. It was based on entirely false modeling by Neil Ferguson, I believe it was, who's been wrong. Every single time he's done a model for a pandemic, he's been entirely wrong. But we trusted him when he said to lock down. And Fauci and his mate Bill Gates backed him up based on no science, which we've now heard and we've now seen. They've admitted they made up the 6 feet rule. So more and more information is coming out that not only was the pandemic a lie, but the vaccine itself, non-vaccine, I have to stop making that mistake, it's infuriating, but for the sake of ease, These non-vaccines have been rolled out, again, not by accident. They were absolutely intended to do the harm that they have done, and I should imagine that people might find it difficult to wrap their head around the fact that their government doesn't actually care about them. So this petitioning our MPs, which I have done for 2 years, I refuse to do anymore, because the only place it's got us in June of 2024 is, a possible headline with COVID vaccines may have helped fuel rise in excess deaths. They absolutely did, and they're still injecting people. It's medical murder. It's that simple. Anyway, my rant's over now, but I get quite passionate about that. So, truth be told, is probably the main reason I'm here, and it's a campaign that I run for the COVID vaccine injured and bereaved. And the whole point of the campaign was to give a voice to those who are injured and a voice to those who are bereaved. Rather than someone like me standing there and speaking for them, the most important thing is to give a microphone to those who have been affected by this and empower them to use their own voice to speak about their experience. And I know some of you in the room today have suffered a loss yourself or may be harmed as well. So 2 years ago, I announced this Truth Be Told campaign. And we are, because obviously I chose not to take any jab, we are a group of vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals united in our mission and in service to humanity, not in service to self. Because if I was, I wouldn't be standing in front of you being arrested 16 times for the campaigning that I have done and charged and convicted. So the purpose of this campaign is to raise awareness about the damage, including life-changing injuries and fatalities, as a direct result of the COVID-19 vaccines. We aim to change the public perception that is a result of the mainstream media and government suppression of the truth. But most importantly, we are there to give a voice to the injured and bereaved. So we have several events that we've had here. This is London. This was a silent procession from the BBC to number 10 Downing Street. This was outside the BBC on a separate event where we climbed over the gates and the barriers to make our point. This was Edinburgh in Scotland, and Adrian Walker, Kirsty Munslow, Tony Shengler and Wayne Snaith are all part of the Truth Be Told family. So we obviously believe that the vaccines are not safe and effective. I don't know how many times we have to keep repeating they're not safe, they're not effective, but I think we should because of the propaganda that's been repeated to us. The damage is unprecedented, as we know. The vaccines absolutely need to be stopped. And we believe that the UK and global governments are in cahoots with the unelected bureaucrats, the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. It's been intentional, and it is absolutely a crime against humanity. That nothing will change my mind from what I've researched, known, and who I've worked with and spoken to for the last 4.5 years. So we seek and speak the whole truth. We seek justice, and we won't stop until we have both. So we ran, we think it's very important as well, and I know some of the very, the French gentleman that I've had a lovely conversation with who's done amazing work with putting a face. Yes, a round of applause for the amazing work that you've done in France. Yes.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to say, with the T-shirt as well, is how important it is that these faces of these people are seen and that they tell their own story, even if all they can do is hold a sign in front of them and tell you what their injury is. Some people weren't well enough to come out to rallies, so we were provided with these pictures and we put them on A1 boards, and much like in Vienna yesterday, we would display their faces at marches, rallies, and wherever we could possibly go, any rally, any parliament event, we would have them with us. So this was London in January of 2022. Right here is the BBC. So the BBC was right outside. We were right outside the BBC, and we took it to them because they were guilty of spreading the misinformation and the government diktat and the propaganda. So they're party to and also culpable of the crimes against humanity I've spoken of before. So again, this is just to demonstrate to you This Alex Mitchell here, he has had his leg amputated from above the knee because of vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia. And Wade Snaith has got Guillain-Barré syndrome and is permanently disabled and permanently in a wheelchair and cannot walk. So again, this is London. So we decided to do a silent procession from the BBC to number 10 Downing Street, where our Prime Minister lives. And we threw roses over as a symbol. And some people chose to write notes about the loss of their loved one, or for those who were injured and bereaved. And we sent a message. It was actually in Rolling Stone magazine, although it was, once again, look at these far-right, anti-vax conspiracy theorists. People who trusted their government, who took at least one dose and trusted them, are now being called anti-vax conspiracy theorists. This is how ridiculous it's gotten. People need to open their eyes and see that this is all a plan. This isn't an accident. So, as I say, truth be told, as a family, and I would actually like to introduce you to some of them. Paul Wilson here holds a board of his fiancée, Victoria Roberts. She died 3 weeks after a Pfizer injection, and she had absolutely no informed consent like everybody else. This is Claire Reynolds. She stands here with her 2 sons. She actually looks beautiful. She looks fairly well. Objectively, you might think, what's wrong with her? Because, she doesn't look ill. She lives every single day with chronic pain and sometimes can't get out of bed. She's been gaslit and ignored by her GP and has had no apology, no acknowledgement whatsoever, just being constantly gaslit. This is Christopher John Williams, and that's 5 months after his vaccine. This is all the medication that he has to take. A previously very, very clearly very fit and healthy man who 5 weeks after the vaccine looks like this and has to get looked after by his wife. His life has changed forever. He's had no compensation. He's had to sell everything he owns just to get the medical treatment that he needs. This is Ali Lilly. Now, Ali is, she's one of the strongest women that I know, because she was vaccine injured by Moderna. And her brother, Peter Reeves, was killed by AstraZeneca. And Ali injured campaigns for herself, for her brother, and for everybody else. And these people, she's again been ignored, been gaslit, doesn't get any help, no financial help. She was basically coerced by her work to take the vaccine for the greater good, for her granny, for the neighbor. So not only did it injure her, but it killed her brother. So she fights for truth and justice along with the rest of us. And Wayne Snaith, another hero, he's wheelchair bound for the rest of his life. Previously very, very fit and healthy, can't work. He has sores on his legs and his feet so bad, but he has to take care of himself at home. He's left with open wounds that he has to treat at home, because the doctor just doesn't bother. He just leaves him to it. But this man has done marathons in his wheelchair to raise awareness for all of the vaccine injured and bereaved, and to raise money for a vaccine injured charity in the UK. So this man is a hero. Yes, this is Sharon. Sharon Eyre. Again, she was on life support for days. Her body was invaded by blood clots. This is just one wound on one part of her leg. This is entirely exposed. You can see her flesh and her muscle. She has lost chunks of her leg because of vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia. And this is her days ago in a hospital, having one of her regular weekly blood tests, or a test for this, that, and the other, wearing her vaccine-injured, truth be told, t-shirt, because every day she's campaigning in the hospital, she wears her t-shirt to send that message. So Sharon, happy, feeling blessed that she's not as hard done by other people. She's not wheelchair bound, so she feels grateful almost. This is Nikki Black. Nikki, again, she's a mother of 2 beautiful daughters. Nikki here having her plasma treatment not that long ago. And this is her daughter, May, who carries her board with her face on it at a rally in London in March of 2023. And Nikki here telling the BBC that they're guilty of spreading lies and that they have blood on their hands. And she's absolutely right. This is Tony Shingler. Tony was in ICU for 14 months. He had a tracheotomy where he couldn't breathe. You can see here for 14 months, and now he's permanently disabled. Previously, again, fit and healthy, a working man that can never work again, and he leads our rally in London in May of 2023, and he carries the board of Adrian Walker with his face. So you've got someone who's wheelchair-bound, vaccine-injured, carrying the board of another wheelchair-bound, permanently disabled, vaccine-injured. Everybody fights together, and here he is speaking in London. This is Alex Kelly. This is Alex Kelly with Tony. Alex Kelly is a fucking superhero. She lost her mother. She didn't lose her mother, sorry. Her mother was killed by AstraZeneca. She died 4 days after 1 dose of AstraZeneca. And not only does Alex campaign, join rallies, go with us and carry her mother's face everywhere, but she's actually set up a legal fund in the UK to help everybody who's not getting the acknowledgement. If they're injured or bereaved, she works with a lawyer. They raise public funds and they try to get consultations for people who have just been left to rot by their government, who are being told that they can't prove causation, therefore they're not injured, therefore stay at home and rot on your own. She's helping those people, having lost her own mother who was killed by the AstraZeneca vaccine. This is Ruth Kelso. Ruth was 23, and she was killed by Pfizer and died suddenly. Her parents, Sharon and Kenneth, have formed a vaccine injury and bereavement support group in Northern Ireland. They are bereaved themselves, and they have created a support group for other vaccine injured and bereaved, because there is no one there to help them. They have to help themselves, and they do. And Sharon and Kenneth trust in God, but they will absolutely not stop until the truth is told, accountability is had, and justice is got for their daughter, Ruth, who is only 23 years old. That's another beautiful life lost or stolen. So you've now seen some of the data and obviously some of their faces, and I will ask our wonderful technician if he could possibly play video number 1.
My name is Kenneth.
And I'm Sharon, Kenneth's wife. Our daughter Ruth died suddenly after taking 1 Pfizer jab. She was 23.
It's obvious to anybody really looking that these injections were actually intended to hurt and kill.
The government has lied to us, and people have died, and they're still dying.
I am vaccine bereaved. They killed my mum.
I am vaccine injured. I have lost my quality of life, my business, my income. I remortgaged my house for private care and living expenses.
I am vaccine injured and bereaved. I had 1 dose of Moderna under duress for work in December 21, and 2 weeks later the adverse event started. My brother had 1 dose in September for work. 2 weeks later he was in hospital, and by October the 10th he was dead.
Just 11 days after the COVID jab, I had life-saving surgery as multiple blood clots invaded my vascular system. I spent a total of 6 days on a life support machine, kept unconscious and unable to breathe without 100% assistance.
The first night I was so ill I thought I was dying. I couldn't use the lower half of my body for around about 12 hours. The pain in my head was grotesque.
I'm vaccine injured with a condition known as chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, the chronic version of Guillain-Barré syndrome. However much I have suffered over the last 3 years, I consider myself extremely fortunate not to be wheelchair bound.
I am vaccine injured. I have lost the ability to walk, The government lied, people died.
The government lied and people died.
The government lied to us. Doctors ignored and gaslit us. People died and suffered life-changing adverse reactions.
It was never safe. It was never effective.
They knew it would harm. They knew it would kill.
They knew it would harm. They knew it would kill.
Now I'm left to suffer the adverse effects on my own. I've had no help financially. You are left on your own to rot.
We were all in it together, apparently, and then all of a sudden, we were not in it together. We were very, very alone.
We are in the middle of a huge crime scene, and yet this poison is still being pushed. And I will not stay silent whilst this evil is perpetuated against us.
That you're putting this in children is the worst thing ever. It is an absolute crime against humanity.
I will fight for accountability. I will fight for justice.
I do this on behalf of all those who suffered and those who died.
I'll fight for us all.
I will fight for us all.
It is a crime against humanity, and the truth will be told.
We will fight for accountability.
We will be faithful to the truth.
Thank you. Thank you. So, as I said, the Truth Be Told campaign was made, created to give a voice to the injured and bereaved, not to speak on their behalf or to speak for them, because there is so much strength within them as a group, and we all support each other. And like I said, some of them feel lucky that they're not as injured as the person next to them, and we all fight together. But we far too often see these horrific injuries that these vaccine injured and bereaved, the injured suffer with every single day, whether it be chronic skin conditions where they can't get out of bed, they're completely bedbound. These are the sores I was telling you about that Wayne Snaith has to look after himself at home because his doctor says that he can do it on his own. Having said that, like I said, we are a family, and this is the Truth Be Told family over the last 2 years. We are campaigning constantly, rallying all the time, whether it be online. They now attend rallies that aren't even specifically about vaccine injury, but they are standing against a corrupt government, global tyranny, the World Health Organization, and the World Economic Forum. And I've never done anything in my life that's been more worthwhile than the Truth Be Told campaign for the vaccine injured and bereaved, and I will fight with them until my last breath for justice and accountability. And as I said, I think quite clearly, I've probably made the point several times, it was intentional, and for the sake of the subtitles, I will read this out. A crime against humanity refers to certain acts that are deliberately committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against any civilian population. These acts are considered to be among the most serious violations of human rights and international law. Unlike regular crimes, crimes against humanity are typically committed on a large scale. I could go with that, a bit of a rap, on a large scale as part of a coordinated plan, often involving governments, organizations, or groups with power over civilians. I don't know if we can better define what's actually happened for the last 4.5 years, but we need everybody to see the truth. Because there is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that this was intentional, that it is absolutely medical murder, and it is indeed a crime scene. I think many are fearful of stating this for the sake of their reputation, or perhaps they cannot quite believe that their government and the evil unelected bureaucratic organizations are the puppet masters, hell-bent on destroying humanity, ridding the earth of the useless eaters that they so aptly name us. This is a battle between good and evil, and I know we are all on the right side of history. We will shine our light on their evil and expose their lies and blind them with our truth. I will not stop until they are held to account, but there will be no accountability until the whole truth and nothing but the truth is told. So that's what I, for one, will continue to do. We will seek justice, we will seek accountability, and the truth will be told. Thank you very much.
Some of the key figures in the movement, as you've never seen them before, painted by me, Jake Fern, with half of my brain concentrating on making a painting and half of my brain concentrating on having a conversation. Do I succeed at either or both? You be the judge. Tune in on Tuesday the 17th of December for the first instalment of Resistance GB's 1,000 Words with David Icke.
Oh, there you go. Oh, that's far better than I thought. Hello. This is great.